Max had so much packed into it. There are, I think, between 18 and 20,000 people there. This like creativity is finally being made available to the masses, that we've got the democratization of creativity being available on the go on all of our mobile devices. And we're seeing non-designers be able to immediately create content and share it everywhere they go and keep it branded and in context. We have Photoshop on iPad had official release, as well as the announcement around Adobe Illustrator on iPad, as well as a Photoshop camera app, and Fresco is now available on the Surface. The other thing is that InDesign turned 20. So 20 years ago, the first InDesign launched, and it even got a mention at Chantanu's opening keynote. Some of the changes in 2020, it has a 25% faster performance at launch. It finally supports SVG file formats and the ability to use variable fonts or infinitely customizable fonts, as well as automatic placement of rules on text columns. And we also had a sneak peek with David Blattner's session from Creative Pro. Do you want to talk about that, Brett?
Yeah, that was really great. So David Blattner had a session that was talking about the must-see tips and tricks. And he had two sessions of it. The first one was held in the Microsoft Theater, which for those who've never been to Max is a about 5,000 seat theater. There were about 1,500 folks coming in to see what's new with InDesign. And Adobe and David obviously want to make awareness of what's going on in terms of InDesign and InDesign Server. And so we were very fortunate to have David show our Silicon Designer and how that fits into the InDesign ecosystem, the whole idea of smart templates, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, and show off what you can do with InDesign in a browser.
Excellent. Some of the other changes that were announced were in XD. There's some really exciting work going on there. It seems to be the product where they're making a lot of initial changes, and then we expect it to roll out to the rest of the creative products. First off, collaboration. They finally have co-editing is available as a beta feature that you can turn on right now. And they also have shared document history and the libraries. Having availability of libraries is going to be amazing. And then they also announced a bunch of changes for the developer APIs. So they extended the ecosystem available to third-party developers. I think we were one of the first, weren't we?
Yeah, so we actually shipped a version of our Silicon connector for Adobe XD last year at Adobe MAX, and that's been really exciting to see how Adobe's continued to develop the XD APIs and ecosystem for developers. It's even more centrally focused this year. But what is really exciting about it is it's becoming the basis for the next phase of integration across all of Adobe's apps. And obviously that's going to take place over a period of time, but it really unifies all of the different methods that developers have used to integrate with apps into one common ecosystem.
It's gonna be awesome. It's never a good Max unless you've got lots of famous people and some good name dropping to be able to do. One of the really fun videos that I was able to watch after the fact was from Billie Eilish and Takashi Murakami. The two artists were talking about creative collaboration in a fireside chat with Ann Lunas. So that one's really cool. John Mulaney was there to host their sneak peeks. They had Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters. John started talking about the different sneak peeks. There were a bunch of really cool technologies that were shared from Adobe Labs, but the one that's getting the most hits on YouTube is actually this Project About Face, which you can see down here in the corner. Project About Face, it's kind of a game changer in terms of what we'll be able to see when people have faked or changed anything in any kind of image. So the jokes going online are that it's going to ruin all of the Instagrammers because now we'll know what they really look like. But you can see here from the heat map that the changes that have occurred in his face are in the eyes. There's some anime feature going on there, and then they added a smile. And then Brett, you were talking about the pixel aspects of this for design.
Yeah, what's really great about that is it is able to detect really down at a pixel level what has been modified and massaged in the image and what is real. And this fits into something that was a real key aspect of the day one keynote, which is Adobe is partnering with Twitter and the New York Times on a content authenticity initiative. And this is just getting off the ground, but this kind of technology, which can spot how something has been edited and manipulated, is obviously going to be a real key aspect for something like that.
Truth in design. What a concept. Well, without further ado, should we go ahead and get started?
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on and show you some new features in Silicon Designer. And then I'm going to pass it all over to Max Dunn, and Max will give you a little bit of the backstory behind what we've done and where we're going. And I think it's really exciting. Obviously, there's only so much we can cover in the short amount of time we have today. So I would invite you definitely to reach out to any of us following the session if you want to talk in more detail. Before we jump into what's new, for those of you that are less familiar with Designer, hopefully most of you have seen it before, but you can see here that I've got a document loaded here. This is what we think of as a smart template. It was built in InDesign using standard InDesign tools and then made available in our Silicon Designer interface. And what this is going to enable me to do is to work with this document and make changes to it. So I can do everything from grab an image here and replace one of the images on the page, or come into the text and make some changes. And as long as I type the right keys here, it won't look like I'm making lots of mistakes. And we can come in, make any changes we want within limits. And that's the idea of a smart template. The designer has the ability to control what is editable and how it's editable. So you can see I can edit this text, but if I were to try to select this logo up here, it's not going to be editable. It's not going to be movable. The designer has locked that logo. So I am able to select this triangle behind it. I'm able to resize and move that around. But this other logo at the top, I could actually replace it with another image. This is an example of an SVG used in InDesign, so or used in Designer. It started as an Illustrator file, but now with CC 2020, we could use SVGs natively. But we in Designer use it as SVGs so that as a user comes here and resizes it, it's going to resize and still be pixel perfect. So that's just a little bit of the basics of Designer. Now let's talk about some of the things that have been added in the last year. So one of the things you'll see here, we've got this, this text here in the middle, our headline and our area. I want to call more attention to it, so I'm going to actually add a drop shadow to the box. We'll orient that top right, and I want that to be not black, but more of a magenta pink to go with our pink box. So you can see that creates a little bit more of a pop. And down at the bottom here, you can see that I've got these images and they are staggered in the template, but I do want to change that around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually multi-select. I'm going to shift select these three images. So you can see we can multi-select those objects and then we can apply changes to all of them. But in my case here, I'm going to go and use our align tool. There's another new item in Silicon Designer, and we'll just all align those to the bottom. So you'll see now they form a nice, neat row. But in my case, I actually want to make this, the text here bigger. I want to call more attention to it. So I'm actually going to select, rather than shift selecting all of the objects that make up this, I'm going to switch to our new layers panel. You'll see in the layers panel, we can see all of the objects on the page. They can carry over the names of those objects from the InDesign template. You'll see here you can do things like affect visibility. So you can show and hide items. You can rearrange items. So in this case, I want the white triangle to sit on top of that purple triangle. But in my case, I said we wanted to make this box bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the headline, and then I'm going to shift select on the copy background. And that is going to select all of the objects there. And we will go ahead and resize those to the full size, full width of the page. So now that we've done that, I'm going to resize this QR code. And so you can see here again, that's another example of an SVG. This image, this QR code is an SVG, so we can resize it to whatever size we want, and it will stay sharp and crisp. Similarly, I'm going to come in here, I'm just going to adjust our headline down a little bit. And now I'm going to go into the body, and we will just change the size of the type. So you'll see all the same controls that we've seen before in Silicon Designer. And you'll see we could do things like change font, so on and so forth. In my case here, I'm going to actually just put an extra break here. We'll go ahead and grab that icon and move that down. That's out of alignment here though, so let's actually select those two icons and align them to the right. So now they are perfectly in alignment once again. So that's just a few of the new items here in our WYSIWYG Silicon Designer. So obviously, as I'm editing, as I'm working with it, we're able to see those updates live and in person. But Max will talk a little bit more about some of the other things we've been doing about Silicon Designer, and I'll just show you that here. This is another form of Designer. So in this case, we've still started with a InDesign template. But in this case of the InDesign template, we wanted to guide the user, someone who might be a little bit more novice. We don't want to give them as much control, and there's all sorts of flexibility there. But we want to guide them, and we've given them a form here where they can change specific content. So we'll go ahead and do that exact same thing. We'll make this the New York Fashion Show, and this is summer 2020. And you'll see as I'm moving through that preview over on the right is automatically being updated. We can use this to work with text, use this to work with images, type on path, all sorts of things. And of course, when we're done, we can click and automatically get the server, InDesign server in this case, to generate the PDF of this. And that just opened up in a new tab. It could download, it could have a watermark. Really, the sky's the limit. But in this case, this is a user experience that's actually really beneficial for a lot of workflows. And now I'm going to show that to you on my iPhone. So now on my iPhone, I can see that exact same form. We'll actually just go ahead and refresh that, and I can come in and make the exact same kinds of change. So we'll just make this the New York Fashion Tour. And now we go look at the preview. We can see that right here. And when we click PDF, it is going to open up a new tab and show me that, that PDF, and I can look at that in more detail. So now what we'll go ahead and do, I've shown you a little bit about what we've been up to in Designer, and I'm going to turn this over to Max, who can talk a little bit more about why we've done this and where we're going.
So I'm going to talk about 4.0 and the version of Silicon Designer that we're finishing up right now for January delivery. First, though, I want to talk about what it is in a more general sense and extend what Brett spoke to. You know, why did we create such a product? What is it at a high level? What needs to summarize from my perspective? The idea is we're letting people create full InDesign documents. We're very InDesign centric here. We started out this company in the year 2000 and looked for composition engines, and we found this one called InDesign 1.0 that was just gorgeous. We thought that's the best one. So we chose that, and we weren't alone, because InDesign now is used by many users. I have no idea how many, but I know it's a lot. And I know there is little competition out there for InDesign. It's the game if you really want to create print documents, as far as we can see. So we want to use InDesign for everything, but not the way you do with just desktop. We're extending it. We're making it so users that don't want to purchase InDesign desktop, or just don't have the skills to use InDesign desktop, which I'm in awe of anyone who knows InDesign. I've worked at it for 19 years professionally, and I still consider myself the weakest, worst InDesign user. So this is for me personally, but a lot of people, they want the power of the rendition that it has, but they don't want to become a designer. You know, the designers are their own breed of artists that can create incredible things that work, that print correctly. They have kerning worked out, and leading, and all these typographical concepts are perfect from a designer. but I might come in and just want to change the text or the image. And so the point is to enable those who aren't graphic artists to create a perfect quality InDesign document, right? And that's really kind of the main goal of it. And then we've extended it so that you can really extend the user experience your own way and make it so some people can do everything. Some people can change the layout, as Brett was doing. You can drag things around, align them, whatever. Others, you do not want them to do that. Others, you want to just lock them down and say, enter your first name and your last name, print the card, you got your card. You know, so there is the chasm between very constrained stuff and very freeform stuff. And we handle the gamut and make the interface what you need, but a very flexible, extensible UI that is decoupled from the behaviors. So we're really round-tripping InDesign with the web, and it turns into different types of UI for different use cases, and we'll show you some of those. Finally, we interface with systems externally. We can reside inside of something, so Silicon Center can come inside of a DAM, inside of a shopping cart, inside of a workflow system, or it can talk to things like data sources or asset management sources. It could link to a social media gallery to pull in an asset or something like that. So interface is critical because we focus on the design aspect, on the online design only. We do not build a DAM. We don't build a shopping cart. We interface with those things built by far better people than us.
Yeah, and I think, Max, the important part there that you had there, but I don't want it to go understated, is that we're making use of modern web standards. So the ability to modify and plug into the system is easy, flexible, and approachable for web designers and developers.
Absolutely, yeah. We're very big on standards here. And also to us, InDesign itself is sort of the standard. I was going to point out one thing about InDesign before going further here. The InDesign products, we've been just loving this product for 20 years now, and it's really wonderful to see Adobe support this product as well as they're doing this release. This is a great release in terms of the extensibility features and the integration of some web standards. SVG is just a thing we've been asking for years, finally in the product. And we see Adobe finally really focusing on Creative Cloud the right way with this product. And one thing to know about with CC 2020, we asked the question, have you upgraded? If you want to keep both versions, there are some great reasons to keep both versions. For instance, if your plugins are a part of your workflow, if you're using C++ plugins in your workflow, it won't work until you have the next plugin. So you might want to keep parallel versions. And we have this blog post in our latest blog. You just go to siliconpublishing.com and click on blog. And this explains how you can keep the earlier version or restore the earlier version if you really wish to. But InDesign is a proprietary technology for sure, but there is no open source technology. There is no web standard that comes at all close to rendering documents. So we chose InDesign. And we started using InDesign desktop because that's all we had in the year 2000 when we started this company. But we begged Adobe for a server, and others did too, and they thought about it internally. And eventually, in 2005, we got our baby, the InDesign server. And it's hard to explain what InDesign server is to someone who hasn't worked with it because it doesn't have a great visualization. It's like a black box waiting to be coded. But it's really the InDesign product deployed in a way that can be called programmatically and used programmatically. And so we can make a web service call and get back an image or a document almost instantaneously now. And beyond that, it can do anything InDesign can do. So you could, for example, get a JPEG of a certain resolution and size out of it, or a PNG, or a PDF with a certain job options file. And we really consider InDesign server the optimal way to do web to print. There's no other composition tool that comes close. And so if you're not using InDesign server in your web to print solution, I think you're losing out, honestly. And it really has been great to see Adobe fully support this. And recently, they've really augmented their developer support. So we feel really empowered by Adobe to extend this better and better over time. So InDesign server is our foundation. And the thing you're working with when you use Designer in a fundamental way is an InDesign document. It's always there. It starts with an InDesign template created by a normal template designer using InDesign. It ends up in memory in an InDesign format. You may or may not need that, but it's going to be an InDesign thing that renders a perfect InDesign output as InDesign alone does, to high quality PDF, to JPEG, to PNG. The main part, though, is really what is the appropriate editing experience for someone who isn't an InDesign user, right? That's the thing is, some people come to us, usually from Europe, and say, can you put InDesign on the web exactly, every feature for feature, and then we won't have to buy any InDesign licenses. That is not the point at all. The point is that, sure, there's a couple million people using InDesign desktop out there, or however many, and those people know how to use it. But what about the rest of us? We don't want to learn InDesign to make a document, to make a greeting card or a flyer, or to update a franchise location. No, you want to type into something that you can intuitively load in your browser and type into. And you may want it to behave in different ways depending on what kind of user you are. I'm just going to type into this.
Yeah, this is a really good example of the rules.
No matter what I type, it's going to fit, which is nice. InDesign doesn't do that necessarily, and you might not want to do that. We have a configurable option on this text frame in the template to say, do I want to copy fit or not? And if I do, what are the rules of that? How does that follow the typographical rules we wish to adhere to? So, that's an idea of, make it easy for people. Make it so they don't have to say, oh, it overflows, let me reduce the number of characters. You can have rules, though, it doesn't go below 7 points or something like that. Or with an image, you can make sure it stays whatever your DPI is, 200, 300, whatever your standard is. So, we're not replacing InDesign, but we're making it so other people who aren't InDesign experts can make InDesign documents. And that can range from someone in a B2C case making a photo book or a greeting card or a school yearbook or an ad for a yearbook, or at B2B, people might want to change their collateral internally. Or feed data to something that will make variable data job from an editable template. So the use cases are really broad for this, and therefore we've made the interface extremely flexible. And the goal really is to let non-designers make InDesign files, and not InDesign files per se, but the output you would get from an InDesign file, which is typically a PDF or PNG or a JPEG, but with all of the power of InDesign and all the interoperability of InDesign, with native Photoshop files, native Illustrator files as referenced objects, now SVG as a referenced object, with PDF job options that are the standard for jobs that just go right into it and work automatically. So again, the InDesign part of it is critical, but what we've built with Designer is a flexible user interface, and allows you to do very different UI. As Brett showed, you might just enter data from a form and get back a very quick response showing your updated asset, with very limited capability, no design capability. On the other extreme, as he also showed, you might want to have very free-form capability, drag everything around, move it around, scale it up or down, all of that. And we're delivering
Max?
solutions that are custom. Go ahead.
We've got a couple of questions, actually, if this is a good point to interject.
Sure.
Okay. So the first one is, we've been talking about InDesign, but do we have any plans to connect with Photoshop or Illustrator for our digital templates?
Yes, we actually have really cool work underway with both of those. Unfortunately, there is not really an Illustrator server at this time. There is, however, a technology called Photoshop as a Service, and we're very excited about that technology and very up on it. Illustrator, we are doing more and more with Illustrator. It has a life of its own. As a server-side technology, it's a little awkward because they don't really have an Illustrator service or an Illustrator server yet. But we happen to have the capability to convert from Illustrator to InDesign at will. So we do have clients that use Illustrator to build their templates, and then they feed Designer through Illustrator. Photoshop is a little different and nuanced, but we tend to use Photoshop more for the imaging than the documents. And we love Photoshop as a service, and we're really excited about that technology.
Cool. The other question was, how can you use, are we thinking of these as smart templates, and how would you use them for personalization?
Maybe that's a Brett question.
Yeah, so, I think, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, You're on.
All right. So I think that there's a lot of ways that you can hook into personalization, and that's where some of our variable data publishing technology comes into it. That's another flavor of Designer. One of the really great things is you can hand variables into the Designer. So imagine I'm working in a CRM and I want to give and feed content that's specific to the customer I'm preparing a brief for. That can feed in the customer's information right into the template. But then we can also do that on scale, where you might start with a document in Designer and then say, I want to create 1,000 versions for individual one-to-one marketing and email that out to my individual customers. And that's a really good example where you can integrate Designer into the rest of your MarTech stack.
Cool. Do you want to talk at all about how, what the differences between form-based inputs versus kind of lights out automated inputs? And then can we change each, like if you wanted some users to be able to only change the monetary value and a date on a flyer versus, have access to everything?
Yeah, that's kind of our current version is really emphasizing that, where we have the capability to provide a UI that's really decoupled from the underlying application. So we don't really care if you're form-based or WYSIWYG. We kind of define with the client what they want and provide APIs that support either one. But it also can get really granular. You can lock down every field on the page except for a certain text box. You can have different roles that would have different rights on different objects. You could have a specific image gallery for a different photograph. So there's a lot of options that get very granular as to what you want to do. And what I've seen, there's this blog post I wrote a long time ago about web to print UI. And those are the kind of parameters. One is just constraint versus freedom. Can you drag something? Can you move something? Is that a good idea or not? People will come up with options for the same kind of content to be free form or to be very constrained. We found that the size of the market is bigger on the fixed side. Most people doing most web to print in the world are not very free form. They're more constrained. The other thing is what you said, direct on canvas versus form-based. Yeah, there's something very beautiful and sexy about editing on the canvas. You just select that text and you edit it. That's the most intuitive experience there is. But it's also error prone. Some people just type into a form and they know they cannot screw anything up on the design level at all. They can't move anything. They can't change the font. They can't change the color. And so constraint can be as valuable as freedom. And the form-based interface can also have some benefits and some ease of deployment, where you don't have to have client-side fonts, for example, to support a non-WYSIWYG, non-on-canvas editor. And then there are things like navigating and tracking progress. But there's a lot of parameters around how you want to let the user have a good experience. And it boils down to, you don't want them to abandon the session. You want them to do something that doesn't need heavy QA. It tends to work. And so you're kind of pushed towards constraint by the business requirements.
Right.
And yet users will demand freedom. They want to say, well, I do want to crop and scale my image. I can't guarantee that my image is going to fit in your resolution for that image. So there are certain freedoms that get there. That I would say the default is to work in a form-based way or a constrained way, and you add the freedom and the design capability that really matters to people, and that will actually enhance the experience without making it more risky.
Got a question around how hard is it to get started with this? Is it difficult to set up the templates? What about integrating into a DAM like AEM or something like that?
Yes, that's one of our primary goals is to make this easier and easier, and we've attained some of that this past year, and we have a roadmap to be better at that. Making it go fast is a whole art around how do you make it easy for people to learn it? How do you make it easy for people to get started? So we are really focused on that. And then certain integrations, we're very integration friendly. So we have APIs, we have partnerships with over 30 asset management software companies. We know a lot of APIs inside out, but mainly we're modular with interfaces so we can talk to things really easily in modern ways, and that's getting better and better. with AEM specifically, that's our most advanced integration so far. Is our Adobe Experience Manager is basically we can plug right into it immediately. We have a whole predefined integration with that. So that's one of the easiest ones for us to integrate with. But in general, we're integration friendly.
Awesome. We're getting a lot of questions about when we're going to be releasing the latest connectors and if we're compatible with the latest 2020 release of Adobe products.
Well, that is some fantastic news. The connectors are basically all done. Thanks to Adobe's wonderful extensibility improvements and the tenacious work of the InDesign team to support all the developers recently, they have really risen. It wasn't always this way. We had some struggles with extensibility for a few years, and the last 3 years is just off the hook. They really got the message from us developers. We need support, and they fully enabled support, and so we were ready with 2020 for most connectors the day it came out. The caveat there is that some of our partners have their own QA process, so they just got the connectors at Nuxio, WebDAM, Binder, Widen, etc. And we're working to release it, but it's not slow this year. It's going to be some Box and Dropbox are already available online. You can download them, and the rest are all in quick form because we really got fully aligned with Adobe on getting the SDKs on time and working with the InDesign team to make sure that things work thoroughly in the beta process. So we're very excited about getting all the connectors out quickly. So if there are any specific ones, just email me or sales@siliconpublishing.com, and we can find your connector for you quickly.
Excellent.
All right.
So
to continue on, Max.
Sure. Then that was what I was going to talk about next, is our integrations. And again, we pride ourselves in being modular. We're not trying to build the whole gamut of technologies around web to print. Some people build complete systems that have a shopping cart, an asset management system, a content management system, a workflow system, and they have all these things that they're trying to do at once. We think that online design is a fine art of its own, and we choose to focus on that and on database publishing with our paginator product. But really, the focus is modularity and being easy to integrate and to get seamless integrations with technologies where you don't think you're leaving the technology, where the end user isn't confused by having two systems, even though there are two systems under the hood. So in this diagram, the top are the AEM processes, and the bottom is the SBI services and the designer services. And the end user does not know they left AEM really. They go into an experience and they're seeing their familiar AEM assets, and it's a special class of asset. So if we're with this system or any other asset management system, you can check in a special class of asset into the DAM, and then you can invoke a process to create a new variant of that template. It's typically a template that's sitting there, and you'll want to edit it. It might also be an in-progress document. But in any case, you're going to want to invoke an editing session to make changes to that asset. And so this is going to load the Silicon Designer UI and pull up that document I've selected, which is an AEM asset in this case. It's in Adobe Experience Manager. And then I can have an editing experience, and this will just go right back to, it'll go right back to AEM when you're done, and you won't really know that you've ever left Adobe Experience Manager. The other parameter for integration is what you see on the right. Now, this could be an AEM library, or it could be an Adobe stock library, or it could be your Facebook pictures. The whole point of our work is to make things very modular and very easy to talk, to each other. So the designer product itself can be contained inside of any shopping cart or any workflow system or any asset management system or any portal. It's something that can be contained. You tend to inherit the security from the containing application. So we don't have a redundant set of users and names. We don't have to know those. We validate between that system and us that they're authentic, and we give that proper interface that can support a modular integration. We can be contained in something. We can also contain something inside of us or talk to other things. So sometimes we're talking to a database that will pull in the agent photo and the agent name for a realtor, or the part data for some parts. Sometimes we're talking to, like I said, a Facebook gallery or a big stock gallery or Adobe stock gallery of assets, or your own internal DAM, or we have a flexible interface that can talk to other things and pull them into Designer at will. And finally, we're evolving to more of a cloud-based solution over time, although we're full out supporting your own cloud, your private cloud, or your on-prem, or your combination, because we do work for the largest companies on earth who often have a pre-existing requirement for where they can put Designer. But we're doing cloud on a bigger and bigger scale every year, primarily currently in the Amazon cloud. So I guess we want time for questions. I should talk about the roadmap.
What they've all been waiting for, Max.
Yes, the roadmap is saying to me to get to the point where we're actually having a roadmap. You know, our roadmap for years was just do in HTML5 what you could do in Flash, which is a very boring roadmap. Do what you did already, you know, in a different technology. But we've pretty much accomplished that. We're past anything Flash could do, and we could do everything better than Flash now. And we could do some things, several things that Flash could never do, which is really cool. So our new roadmap is kind of around these things. Like I said, we've been through a deep experience with server-based rendition at scale the last couple of years. Some of our clients are doing 35,000 documents in a minute. So we really know how to scale at this point on the server. And on the WYSIWYG side, we have a lot more features than we've ever had. We've expanded and expanded the WYSIWYG. So what we're now doing is really reconciling those two extremes and making the system give you what you need, either with a simple, you know, form-based thing, but maybe you can scale and crop the image, but not edit the text on the canvas, or to the extreme of a full-out, you know, InDesign on the web kind of thing. So we have a work to make the product easy to configure, and we're creating a starter kit that lets people get started fast. We've seen that with web-to-print solutions, that's a key thing, to get started easily with an example, a reference application, and clearly defined APIs. So you can build your own UI if you wish. You could build an entire front end if you wish. But we're trying to make it easier and easier for people to get started. And inside of that, we're working on template setup intensely to make sure that that part of it is easy enough to really let people work without us. We want to be sort of, here it is, take it and run with it. We've been a little too much on the other side of we have to tweak it sometimes. But we're trying to eliminate that and make it a real API-driven, run it yourself sort of product. With long document features, that's kind of, we're like kind of like where InDesign was in 1.0 or 1.5. We started out, you know, 25 years ago, we were doing the Intel Pentium manuals and 2,000-page catalogs. And somehow by 2009, we were this Designer, we dumbed ourselves down to the greeting card. And that's about what you can do in web-to-print easily, is a one-page document. Over time, we keep expanding the long document features so we can handle heavy pagination, threaded text across many pages, robust table support, list support. So we're expanding out back to the long documents we started with, and we're also expanding back to the semantic XML we worked with for decades, where you know we have done a lot of work. We did it into FrameMaker for Adobe, and we have a lot of background in semantic XML and in things like InCopy. So, you know, we're supporting more sort of standard authoring workflows better over time. We've always had a real interest in dimensional products, and dimensional products are fun and surprisingly easy. It's funny how 3D is easier than 2D sometimes. But this is a box, and I can see, you know, the inside of the box is being edited here. So we've actually done some designers that render STL and other outputs to feed a 3D print workflow. And we've certainly fed a lot of InDesign documents that turn into dimensional boxes or dimensional products and that sort of thing. We are also interfacing with our paginator products and with variable data publishing more and more. So Designer can be a sort of template editor for a variable data job, and you can do a limited form of variable data out of the box. We're also really enthused by Adobe's trajectory with their extensibility and with the server product itself. So we work closely with Adobe. We're very thankful for what they've done recently and how well they've supported us over the years. And they really have a a great roadmap for the extensibility, which is why we're doing XD, and we love XD as well. But XD is critical to us because they're doing their latest, greatest extensibility in that product, and that product is one of the hottest, most fast-moving products that is really taking over and doing a great job at what it does. As was mentioned earlier, we're doing more with Illustrator, more with Photoshop, and staying in tune with Adobe's services offerings and their AI offerings to be, we're still very much in tune with the entire Adobe trajectory, not just the Creative Cloud, but even the Marketing Cloud.
And it's exciting to see all of those things get tied together, and the ability to share assets. So, Adobe recently showed the ability to take Creative Cloud assets into Microsoft Office and PowerPoint. And so, it's not inconceivable to think that that's something we may want to look and take advantage of deeper in the future.
We have a few more questions, Max, if you're ready to get peppered with some.
Sure.
So we've got one around, how can I use Designer for publishing to multiple channels?
That's easy. I mean, out of the box, it does everything that InDesign does. So it can render images, and an image is often the channel. It can also emit HTML, although that's where it branches, and email, that's where it branches, and there are some nuances to how you output things that are not just an image or print. So out of the box, images and print are done and easy and automatic outputs. When it comes to email, that's a fine art of feeding an email chain. We often have to sort of separate the content from the presentation a bit, but we have several implementations where we've done a really great email integration. And with web, it's even more subtle, where you need to know what you're publishing to. And by its nature, Designer tends to be more of a print-centric fixed layout thing. When you get publishing to the web and creating, say, a Perl from it or stuff like that, then you have the whole responsiveness question that comes into play. So I can't say we just automatically multi-publish. I don't want to lie, but we absolutely support it completely every way you can do it. So we do as well as anyone does with this, and we can absolutely do a lot with multi-channel publishing.
And I think this is a great example where you may look at using Designer to capture that content, and that content's going to go into a print use case straight out of Designer. But we may lift that content off the page and then feed that into a CMS that is going to publish that out for the web, or into an email system as modular content that can be included in a newsletter blast. So those are typically workflows that are much more informed by what's going on that side of the business and where that content's originating. In a lot of workflows still, that content is originating in the print workflow. So it makes sense to be able to leverage Designer as that input method.
And it's kind of related to what we're doing with XML support and semantic, underlying semantic content. We have a deep experience with the traditional XML publishing workflows, and that's the most powerful way you can do multi-channel, is to separate the content from the presentation. Designer's a little bit like InDesign, where they can get mungs together, where you're not really maintaining the semantics independent of the layout, but you're really making a presentation document. So to really do multi-channel right, you would do more of a separation of content than we've done to date, but we're really on that, and that's part of our focus for the next year.
Cool. And this is a related question of, so if my sales folks keep using outdated versions of our product images, is there a way to use Designer to keep them up to date without stifling their efforts to create new material that's personalized for each of their prospects?
Absolutely. That's the whole point. I mean, this gives you managed content, right? That's the point. Yes, you can absolutely do that. We also do that with our connector product. Right?
Yeah, and that's a really good that's a really good example of where connector and Designer fit together, right? If I'm building a Designer template or a template I'm going to use in Designer, and I'm using the connector to source assets from the DAM, I have that dynamic link to that asset in the DAM. So when it gets updated, when it gets versioned, the next time that template's pulled up, that's going to be used. But in The more variable data approach, we see a lot of customers wanting to, when any asset or piece of data that's used in a document gets modified, we want to generate out a new version of that document. And so those are what you might think of as more fully automated workflows that we're involved in today.
And in terms of supporting their entire kind of MarTech ecosystem, there's a question around what are integration plans, or have we already with Google Drive, OneBox, Dropbox for better visualization of previews or even editing in design documents?
Well, we can integrate with anything. We haven't. I mean, you can look at our site, our connector page for the current DAM and storage platform partnerships, and we can expect 5 more soon. But it's really the cool thing about Designer itself for integration is that it has an abstracted image API where we normalize to a single internal format from whatever it is. So we have a sort of driver approach, and if we build a driver for a new image source, then we have that image source as an available source. So we can do almost anything. If you want specifics, we're totally there with Box and Dropbox. We have not really done Google Drive yet, but it's inevitable. And what was the other one?
OneDrive, Microsoft.
Yeah, no, OneDrive and Google are not immediately in the sites, but there are so many requests for both of those. They do seem inevitable for connectors. And then if anyone has a one-off implementation with Designer, it's very easy for us to do either of those.
Okay, I think that probably wraps up our call today. Thanks everybody for joining us. Everyone stayed really engaged. It was really exciting to have this many attendees. And thanks, Max, for showcasing where we're headed and where we are.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.